Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask Day 0, the day before the game actually begins. That's where we're going today. So we attempted a Day 0 code in our Majora's Mask beta quest, and it was an awesome, weird, spooky, glitched out thing that ultimately didn't even work. Luckily, a fan of our show by the name G-Man Willis gave us a ton of information and explained to us how to glitch the game into a Day 0 state. He also gave us information explaining the hows and whys of what's actually happening to the game when you're doing this. So let's get started with an explanation of what we're actually talking about here. Majora's Mask was originally a Nintendo 64 disk drive game. Yes, another canceled DD game that we're covering on the show, I know. I guess it wasn't, I shouldn't say it was canceled, it's more of a shifted game since it shifted from the 64 DD to the regular 64, but you get the idea. Either way, Majora's Mask likely started off on the DD since the developers began the project after abandoning Ura Zelda, an expansion for Ocarina of Time that was also slated for the disk drive. On the DD, Majora's Mask would have had double the storage capacity. That's 64 megabytes or 512 megabits. But we all know the story, the disk drive failed and lots of games had development shift from the disk to the cartridge. You know, in most cases, content was cut, and consolidated. In the case of Majora's Mask, the biggest example of this is that it went from a 7-day full week cycle to a 3-day cycle. That's right, originally Majora's Mask was a full week. So taking a look at this here, Day 3 is Day 7, Day 2 is Day 6, Day 1 is Day 5. So when I say Day 0, what I really mean is Day 4 for the disk drive version. It's kind of confusing, but hopefully this visual will help. Obviously, throughout the game, in both versions, the moon gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it crashes into Termina, killing everyone, apocalypse. Also note that the moon's not really to scale here in how big it gets. This is just sort of a visual example that I wanted to put together for everyone. Now, would the game have been better on a 7-day cycle? I don't know. Maybe yes, because it had more content. Maybe no, because Nintendo ultimately had to sort of cut the fat and make Majora's Mask a sort of tighter, leaner package. That's up for debate. Let me know in the comments below what you would have preferred. Quick note before we get started here. The program I'm using doesn't really work well with the blur and out of focus effects that this game has. So I'm going to be cutting a bit out here and there. For example, on screen now is something that I'm going to be cutting out in the future, just so you don't have to look at it. So there's going to be a bit missing, but it's not going to be crucial. It's just for cosmetic purposes. Otherwise, I'm going to take you through step by step how to get this glitch to work. Also, I'm going to be utilizing the debug version of Majora's Mask since it has options for completely free movement. Start this game and immediately empty your items by going back in time. For some reason, once we actually get around to glitching the game, if you have items, the game crashes and it just doesn't work. Okay, now that that's done. Remember the owl statues that give you one-off saves? Well, we're going to use one, but it's not what you think here. Notice how I'm leaving this owl statue, I'm actually going into a different area. It has to load a completely different zone here. But I can see the owl statue through the corridor, but it's not the same owl statue. If you have a levitate code that you can utilize to get to it, use that. Otherwise, with the debug ROM, press up on the D-pad and activate the free movement options to get over there. Basically, you need to bypass the transitional loading zone to be able to access this area. This owl statue is just scenery. But for some reason, it has the same code as the other statues, but with no geographic location. It simply exists. So when we save to it, which you're going to need to do, the game doesn't know where you are or where to put you when you load up the save. So go ahead and give it a save, and then start back up your file. Now notice that we've spawned at a default location, the mayor's residence. The game is still confused here. And we're going to need to go back in time in a second here to confuse it even further. Now keep in mind, the game's boundaries are basically 72 hours, 3 days, and then the game ends, the moon falls, boom, everybody dead. But we're kind of outside the boundaries here. So we're actually going to want to go back in time again, and it's going to take us back in time an additional day to Day 0, because, again, we're outside of the boundaries of what it normally, we're outside of the framework of what it normally will do. So, utilize the Song of Time. However, don't complete the cutscene, otherwise the game will crash. Reset immediately after seeing Link fall. Like the moment you see him begin to fall, boom, reset. Now the game engine places us in day 4. But you don't see anything visually that's indicative of day 4. We still have a few more steps here and then we'll get there. What we need to do is called an Ocarina Dive Glitch. We use the free movement mode to get up on this ledge, swing your sword, and pull out the ocarina immediately. Recommendation is to utilize the Fairy Sword, the Great Fairy Sword. This can be a little bit frustrating. You're not going to get it at first, but basically get your feet parallel to the ledge here, swing the sword, immediately pull out the ocarina, and play the Song of Time. Now normally when you play the Song of Time, it wants to take you back in time and it wants to showcase a cutscene, but notice how we just sort of spawn here. What we've done is confused the dialog box and prevented it from showing. We can access that dialog box, asking us if we want to go back in time, just by opening any other dialog box in the game, like with an item, for example. But here's what happens. The game can no longer play a cutscene. What it normally does is sets us to a default 5:59 a.m., showcases the cutscene. A new day always begins at 6 a.m. But because we don't have the cutscene here, we are sort of defaulted into 5:59 a.m., which is technically not the beginning of a new day. This step finally allows us to see 0-day visuals. Now notice the tent. It's gone. It hasn't been built yet. Now let's take a look at the moon. It's a little bit smaller, isn't it? Let's compare this to day 1, morning of day 1. I'm in a slightly different area here because I couldn't showcase the moon without it overlapping the wall because it was kind of big, but you get the idea between the two. It's larger on day 1, smaller on day 0. And if you talk to this guy over here, it just crashes the game because he doesn't have anything scripted for day 0. Let's see what the Happy Mask Salesman has to say. Yep, that's definitely over 3 days worth of time. We'll double check that with a Sheikah Stone. With this glitch, you can go to different places and activate it wherever. Notice here I'm at Romani Ranch. I activate the code and the boulder's gone. Meaning that the boulder wasn't scripted for day 0, it would have appeared on day 1. Also, notice this when I try to activate the code after the sun sets. So that's day 0, or the original day 4, if you will. Let me know in the comments below if you discovered anything on day 0 that I haven't shown here. But you might be wondering and asking yourself, what about the original first day? What about really any of the other days? Well, let's take a look. Luckily, there is a glitch that'll take us all the way back to the beginning of the original 7-day cycle. Sort of. Keep in mind that these are beta remnants. Kind of like when we go beta questing, right? So when we go beta questing, there's just little bits and pieces of what's left over in the code. Obviously, there's no fully fleshed out day 0, for example, no fully fleshed out day 1 from the original DD version, because these things were cut. But there's remnants that we can take a look at. And luckily, this next glitch is a lot easier and less time-consuming than the first one. First off, you're going to start your file up and do the Song of Double Time until you reach the evening of the final day. Go to the observatory and wait for the countdown to get under 1 second. At the last moment, talk to the astronomer and look through the telescope. And then immediately exit out. Bam, the countdown is gone, and so is the day timer. Let's go outside. Looking up, taking a look at the moon here, it is a tiny speck. The Sheikah Stone gives us a glitched out time remaining. The reason being is because it's programmed to showcase 2 digits by 2 digits. Obviously, 7 days worth of hours is over this amount, so it errors. So when it's doing its countdown here that we sort of bypassed, the game engine knows it's in its final day. But the program still has code for the original first day of the original 7-day cycle. So by doing this glitch, you confuse the engine and it cycles all the way back to the very first day. Let's take a look at the moon here. Is it just really far away, or is it tiny? Turns out it's just tiny. One of the things that G-Man Willis mentioned to me that I really liked was, imagine if we would have gotten the DD version of the game. players wouldn't have even noticed that there was a face on the moon because it was so tiny. You know, Majora's Mask would have been pretty creepy, the overall feeling of the game would have been pretty creepy, and then on day 2 or day 3, when it finally was big enough, you would have seen this very imposing face on the moon. What a surprise that would have been to the players. Would have been pretty cool. Now, with the game that we have, we start off the game and it's very creepy, but it's immediate. We immediately know that there's a face on the moon. It would have been just a little bit different before. So there might be more here, supposedly there is, but I'm going to leave it up to you to play around with it. I couldn't find too much more aside from the moon and things just being absent, like the tent scaffolding that we showcased in Day 0. Now that said, I definitely appreciate you guys subscribing and clicking that notification button so you know when our videos are coming out, and other than that, we will see you all next time. Before we go here today, a big thank you to G-Man Willis for really helping me out with this. He made video tutorials, he explained exactly how these glitches worked. We're very appreciative, so thank you very much, sir, and thank you again to everybody for watching the episode today.